Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Life Science Rundown. This is Nicholas Capman with the FDA Group. Before we jump into our discussion for today, just a little bit about the FDA Group. We help life science companies in the areas of quality assurance, regulatory affairs, clinical operations, commissioning, qualification and validation, CMC, and pharmacovigilance. We offer three different engagement models, which are consulting, staff augmentation, and full-time employee recruitment. So if you ever find yourself in need, just head over to the fdagroup.com to check us out and get in touch. So today I am speaking with Annalise Ludtke. Hey, Annalise.
Hey, Nicholas, delighted to be here.
Glad to have you on. So, in order to start, I would appreciate if you could introduce yourself and then also introduce the topic we're going to be discussing today.
I'd love to. So, my name is Annalise Ludtke. I'm the Senior Manager of Marketing and Communications at Vodori. Vodori is a software company. We provide software solutions that help facilitate the review, approval, and distribution of regulated content. So, we work specifically within life science companies, providing software specifically for life science companies. I'm also the host of the Amend and Progress podcast, which is Vodori's podcast about the material review process, really designed to just help companies make this required process a little bit easier one day at a time. And so today, really digging into the promotional review process. This is sort of the bread and butter within Vodori, and I'm delighted to sort of talk through common challenges with the promotional review process, things that organizations can think about from a best practices perspective. Again, this is sort of a required process within life science organizations. And so hopefully I'm here to provide a little bit of education and best practice to make that a little bit easier.
Okay, awesome. So we'll start at a high level and I'm sure we're going to drill down. But what typically happens during this process?
Yep. So, for a life science company, one of your main goals is to bring your product to market, right? And so one of the primary ways that companies do this is developing advertising and promotional content. Now, because we work within a regulated space, that content has to go through a very specific review and approval process. Sometimes this is called MLR review, sometimes it's called ad promo review, sometimes it's called something completely different. But essentially, you're just reviewing and approving this content to make sure that it is truthful, there are no non-misleading claims, every claim is substantiated with the appropriate documentation, and then you can get that content to market. Now, because this process is required, it's not the most fun, right? Organizations struggle with it. It's one of these processes that organizations are required to do, but it's not the greatest. And there's a lot of bottlenecks that occur, a lot of inefficiencies. And so I'm hoping we can, illuminate some helpful things within that arena today. But yeah, essentially, a marketing or communications or an agency person will submit some content for review. Medical, legal, regulatory takes a look at it, hopefully reviews and approves, and then that content can get submitted to the FDA if appropriate or get to market.
Okay, awesome. So paint a picture for me. So I'm involved in this process in one way, shape, or form. What are some of the common frustrations, issues, challenges, bottlenecks that I can expect to face when going through this process?
Sure. There's quite a few to pick from, honestly, but let's just imagine, a lot of the people that are going to be at this table have different goals and motivations, right? The marketing and communications folk want to get their content to market. They've, spent a lot of time and effort and resources developing a video or a website or social media content. They're ready to get that to market. And so they're really looking at how can we review and approve this content as quickly as possible. You have other teams within the organization, medical, legal, regulatory. They're really there to get to, take a magnifying glass out and make sure that content is completely compliant. There are no non-misleading claims in there. And so they're there from a rigor and compliance perspective. Some of the challenges that we can see within this process is feedback. The feedback gets hard to understand or consolidate. So you can imagine, depending on how many people are involved in the review process, how many eyes you have on a certain document, you can imagine maybe sometimes the feedback gets really long or it gets really complex, or there are disagreements on, maybe someone provided feedback on one area, someone disagrees, right? And so you sort of are within this collaboration area where there's push and pull. You're trying to meet a deadline, but obviously everyone's feedback needs to be heard. And sometimes it's hard to consolidate that feedback and understand, okay, what are exactly the changes I need to make in the next round to hopefully then get this content approved. And so I would say, review bottlenecks can be a common issue here, either because it's consistently stuck with one particular department or person,
Hmm.
or because this feedback consolidation just takes a long time and is difficult to understand.
Hmm.
Another common challenge are claims. So many organizations use things like a claim matrix to maybe pre-approve some of the promotional or advertising claims they want to make within their documentation, um, and try to get those claims pre-approved so that once content gets to the review process, there's a little bit of understanding of we can say this claim, right? If your claims matrix is out of date or things aren't linked appropriately, or it's hard to understand where the claim matrix even is within your shared drives to understand what's approved and what's not. Things can get really caught up within
Hmm.
the claims management aspect of things. And so that's another common challenge we see as well.
Hmm. What is the range of, in terms of numbers of people that could be involved from a small number to a large number? And we'll leave the outliers out, but generally speaking, what's the range of the number of people involved in something like this?
It's really going to depend on the size of the organization. Typically, we see teams all the way from, a handful of employees. Like it could really be, for a really small emerging company, maybe they're outsourcing the review because they just don't have that team internally yet. So it could be a handful of folks all the way to, tens of folks that are involved because you've got not only all of the necessary compliance departments, but maybe brands in there and corporate communications is in there. And so it kind of depends on the individual organization, the size of your team, and also the risk tolerance within that organization. And that risk tolerance can also be dependent on the type of material. So maybe you involve more people if it's a presentation for a conference, you involve fewer folks when it's a tweet about, come see us at booth 75 at that conference. And so there are some different levers that organizations can pull in terms of who do I need to involve in the review process and how does that differ across the types of content that I'm routing for review.
Okay, so there's different applications for a promotional review because you mentioned I might be going to a conference as opposed to submitting something to the FDA.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and that's also going to depend on if, the types of regulations that you need to adhere to as well. But yeah, there are, whole host of different types of content that we see routed through the Vodori system in particular. But it can be a lot of different content subtypes, digital, non-digital. There's a whole, menu of different content types out there today.
Okay. So let's talk about a regulatory or submission to the FDA. What is the general time from start to finish that a promotional review process would take?
Just the individual, like, I'm just the review and approval portion of that.
I'll let you answer it in the best way you can.
Okay, yeah, no problem. I'm going to refer. So, one of the things we do at Vodori is we take a look at process benchmarks. So, what I can speak to is how long it takes content once it's submitted for review to get approved. And we look at benchmarks for a couple of reasons. And one of those being because this is such a necessary process for life science organizations, but there's not a lot of guidance around what the process should look like, how long should it be taking, are we even close? And one of the main sort of pain points with this process generally is it's taking too long. It's taking me 3 to 6 months to get a piece of content approved, which is painstaking for everyone involved, but especially for that marketer or that commercial person that really wants to get that content to market. And so we are just released our 2024 benchmarks report. And so what we saw for 2024 metrics is that it takes about 13.8 days on average from the time that piece of content is submitted for review. So that includes, preparing that content by leaking claims and substantiations, review through those different departments, feedback consolidation, and approval. So it takes our customers about 2 weeks to go through this entire process. Which can be a helpful guidepost for those that maybe aren't sure how long their process are taking, but that's in 2024 metrics what we're seeing today.
That strikes me as reasonable.
Yes,
Would you agree with that?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes. And granted, your process is going to ebb and flow, right? Some things are going to take faster to review and approve. Some things are going to take longer. We see things like videos typically take longer than that to review and
Mm,
approve, right? You've got a lot of things to consider within videos. The feedback consolidation can also take longer for specific types of content because you're working with an agency and it's something that you're having to outsource. There are a whole host of reasons. But
Mm.
I think, generally we feel like 2 weeks is a reasonable amount of time considering who has to be involved and all of the sort of preparatory things that have to go into this, right? Through that, claims and substantiation, all those things that I mentioned. And so, yeah, I think 2 weeks feels based on our data. So not feels our, 2 weeks is about where things are landing. And I think that's a reasonable amount of time for sure.
Okay. So I can imagine this process, like any other process, can be efficient and it can be not efficient.
Mhm.
So what are some of the tips, tricks, pieces of advice that you would give to the audience about how to make this efficient?
Yep. One thing I'll preface this is by saying the better this process is for your teams, the better it's going to go. And that goes for any type of process within your organization, right? But the promotional review process is no exception here. So, a couple of things we talk about in terms of process best practices. One thing that we've seen work really well is a concept review. So let's say you are developing a video for a campaign for the first time, or you've got to stand up a new website, or something about the content that you're creating is new, novel, something you haven't done before. It can be incredibly helpful to do a concept review with those key departments that you know are going to have to review and approve the final content to say, this is the target audience. This is the intent of this piece of content. This is what this is going to look like. These are the claims we're planning on using. And that way, there can be some really healthy dialogue early on in the
Mm.
content development process. So you can work through, of course, any marketing and communications items, but also compliance issues of, I don't know that this can
Mm.
go there, or we need to think about the placement of certain aspects within this content. And it opens up healthy dialogue early so
Mm.
that once you do spend time creating the content, you have really clear direction from your teams. And
Yeah.
that often helps make the review and approval process a lot easier because everyone's seen it. We've agreed
Right.
on it. We've talked about it. And if there are concerns, you can harken back to say, well, remember we talked about A, B, C, X, Y, Z, and we kind of agreed on this thing. It's just incredibly helpful pre-alignment, no matter where in your organization you sit, the more pre-alignment you have, the better. And so that's one that we've seen be
Mm.
incredibly helpful. No matter the size of your team, organization, the concept review is really an excellent thing to think about if you're running into process challenges.
Yeah, because I could see the alternative to what you just recommended is I'm in charge, I submit it, and now it's showing up in everybody's inbox as something that they need to review and approve. And they say, well, I'm not going to get to this now, or why is this here? And I can see there'd be a lot of uh, not just frustration, but I can see how the delays would really become much more egregious when you don't
Definitely.
have that prep meeting. So that resonates.
Yep. And it also creates a bit of like shared ownership over the content too, right? If medical feels like you brought them in early enough where they could share their point of view and guide you in a way that would make sure the content is compliant, they feel better about the content once it gets to their desk for that review and approval of, oh, they
Mm.
engaged me in this way. I was
Hmm.
involved, and it's more of a collaborative environment that you're creating instead of a we created this, I just need you to review and approve it so we can like get on with our day type thing. It's a little bit of like shared ownership, shared why, pre-alignment that I think is incredibly important for something where you can't do this process without human beings.
Hmm.
So let's help the human beings work a little bit better together and improve that collaboration because it's something y'all have to do and we need humans in order to do it.
Yeah, well, I can see how that would be hugely effective. What else would you recommend in order to make this efficient?
Yeah, so one thing we talked about in terms of challenges earlier on in the conversation was this concept of feedback. We all have submitted content for feedback before and we get a ton back, and it's hard to know what do I need to change? Is this just an opinion? I'm just not quite sure.
Mm.
And so, one thing that's helpful is to literally put in your standard operating procedures that the reviewers need to say this is either a suggested change or a mandatory change.
Oh, nice.
So, either just putting that word in front of your feedback or comment, or within the Vodori platform, for example, we have color-coded annotations. So you could say, okay, every annotation made in red is suggested, blue mandatory.
Mm.
And so just thinking through how to create some like mini systems within your review process so that once the content owner gets that feedback, it's like, okay, I know for sure I need to make these 10 changes. These five are suggested. Those are the ones I need to follow up questions on, or I need to get someone else's opinion, or it just helps prioritize time for that content owner to understand exactly what they need to do to revise that content and then submit it back for review. So incredibly tactical, but incredibly beneficial for everyone, honestly, involved in the review process.
Yeah. I can't help it because I I don't submit these types of reviews across my organization because I'm a consulting firm. But everything you're saying brings me back to MSA reviews. And so I'm like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Or that, the other one you just recommended, that's a really great idea. So that's kind of the angle I'm looking at it.
Absolutely.
But keep going. This is good stuff.
Yep. So we did, let's see, concept review, office hours. Okay, so traditionally, sometimes companies approach their advertising and promotional review through meeting. Probably more common when we were all maybe if you're all in the office together, you can bring that group together and literally pull up the document on the screen and say, okay, this is what's up for review. Let's start to talk through it. Vodori, we see about half of our customers do review meetings now. So a lot of this can be done asynchronously. However, if you're running into a really common review challenge, the same thing keeps coming up. They continue, some folks continue to use the wrong logo. Let's just put that out there as an example. Things are just starting to creep up as common process challenges. Sometimes what we've seen be helpful is just hold like, I mean, semi-regular office hours where you can bring the team together and say, okay, team, where are we running into problems? Where are there sticking points? Are there things that we're consistently bumping up against that we need to address? Are there things you don't know and want and that would help facilitate the review process? There is something to be said about bringing the team together, whether you're doing the review meeting or not, to talk about the process. Now, it's like, oh my gosh, we have to have a meeting to talk about the process. But if this is something you're doing daily, weekly,
Mm,
these little small conversations about where the challenges are and how to fix them together as a group have compounding effect because then you
mm,
can start to put some things into practice that are going to benefit you tomorrow, the next day. You're never not going to have content for review and approval. And so it's these small interactions within your team that you can talk things through, identify action items, and just continue to talk about the process because the process is ever changing. Your company is ever changing. The team composition is always changing. People are leaving, new folks are coming in. And so to think that you're never just one and done with MLR review, right? Oh, we've set up this process and this is how it's going to work forever and ever. We really don't see it that way because nothing is stagnant about a business. Therefore, your processes also need to change alongside. And so an office hour format can also be helpful in if you have new team members and you need to talk through certain things, what a great format to bring everyone together and just have dialogue about this process and how to make it run better.
yeah. You mentioned the wrong logo, right? So I was thinking a lot of the stuff that goes in is, and you said, across multiple examples of promotional review, so, some
Yep.
of them are going to be revved, right? So this is the logo moving forward. This is that piece of information from this date forward.
Mhm.
So, do you have a recommendation about making sure that the library to which people have access to is up to date and it's in one central location?
Yeah, so digital asset management is a huge component here, the sort of your one source of truth for information. And so I'll speak a little bit about the Vodori platform. There's obviously a lot of great tooling out there, but you do need a repository, right? And so thinking about we need to have a logo within our digital asset management system or the Vodori platform where that's the final logo and everyone understands that. And that's really the only place where we're pulling that information from. And so it is advantageous to have elements of your content always up to date. You need some ownership over that content. If something is revved, like who is the person responsible for doing that and
Hmm.
maintaining it? So there's a little bit of ownership too around your assets and how they're managed and revved and all of that great stuff. But definitely a one source of truth for your content is incredibly helpful, not only from like an advertising and promotional perspective of, you know, Sell sheets get revised all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, you can imagine if this is unruly in a, shared drive format, what's the latest version? This one says 1.1, this one says 2.1. Like, which one am I looking at? So having one place where you can have this is the final approved content, and also this is the history of this document. So if you need to go back and look at previous iterations or versions, you can, but also the elements of the content, like the logo and claims, to the extent that you can have all that pre-approved and if when within one source of truth or one central repository is incredibly helpful.
Yeah, and the central repository, great idea. Also, having an audit trail. So if somebody says, hey, we changed our logo, when did we do that? Who agreed to that? Having that audit trail, I think, could reduce frustration and delays, which
Absolutely.
leads me into my next question, right? We talked about the 13.8 days.
Hmm.
Are there any tips and tricks for that person? We all know who they are, that takes forever, right? What tips and
Sure.
tricks do you have for that individual or
Yeah.
handling
So,
that individual?
so a couple of things. One thing we advise is that if there's going to be like a peak period of, let's say maybe you're getting ready for a campaign, and you know that there's going to be quite a few pieces of content submitted for review and approval. Marketing and comms folks, tell the team, hey, next week there's going to be XYZ content. I need it reviewed and approved by this due date. Communicate those peak periods in advance because oftentimes review and approval of content for medical, legal, regulatory folks, that's not their full-time job. This is
Right.
something that they're just doing within, the other things that they have going on. And so prioritization for them can be helpful. Okay, I know this is coming. I know that this is going to be the due date. Let me adjust my own workload accordingly. That can be really helpful. Obviously the reminder piece comes up of like, oh my gosh, I've reminded this person several times and not getting through. One of the advantages, I will just put a plug in for the Vodori platform, is we can set reminder dates. So
Mm,
you can remind the person that it's their, that something is, late for review through the system and not through you. Creates a little bit more of like a system-led nudge notification versus one that's coming from you. Sometimes that can be helpful. But I do think just the early communication on when things are coming and what those due dates are can be hugely helpful. And maybe if that's something you're running into really frequently, maybe that's a one-off conversation you can have with that
right.
person. Maybe that's something you bring to office hours and, obviously don't try to pit one person against the other. But if this is an issue that is consistently coming to, up to the top of the priority list,
Mm,
talk about it and
yeah.
figure out what are the things that we can do within our organization to make this a little bit better.
And I was just thinking like the emojis, right? You got the smile to the I'm not I'm
Sure.
kind of dissatisfied to them really angry. So like each
Yeah.
day that person doesn't respond, like the face gets angrier and angrier.
There you go. Assign some emojis if that helps. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah,
Bring
yeah,
some brevity and levity to it. Is never a bad thing.
yeah. So and then there was another different versions, right? So this is another issue, right? So now I'm assuming your software has a great answer for this, but I'm gonna think, right? I've got to send it out to four people. So I
Mhm.
send it out, sometimes controlling what's the master document and making sure that they're not, commenting on an old version that gets passed along and then certain things get dropped. How does that all work out?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a huge issue, right? And if you're doing this manually via email or you're just uploading things to shared
Exactly.
drive, it's completely
Yeah.
unruly. And and this is where things can go wrong during review because what if someone just reviews the wrong thing
Right.
because they thought they didn't know, right?
Right.
And so, again, I'll speak about what we're able to provide through the software platform.
Yeah.
You can compare versions within Vodori. So let's say you had a version that was submitted for review, a bunch of feedback came back. You submit the new version within the same, it's all of the versions of the document are connected to one another. But then we have a version compare tool where the reviewers can literally pull up the old version of the document along the newest approved and see this is okay, this is what changed, this is what changed. Yes, this addressed my feedback. And so you literally have a side-by-side comparison of that content.
Mm.
And then, we sort of within the platform, it's sort of like once you upload a new version of that content, the old one is still included within the audit trail. You can still access it, but it's not going to be available to the end user or your sales team or your MSL. So there's a chain of custody of the content, but only the latest approved version is ever going to be what's available for use for your team. And so it's helpful for the traceability of like what's all happened, right? What's all the feedback that we've collected, all the changes made. And then I think that version comparison tool has been really helpful for individual reviewers and just making sense, especially if it's a round of review that was like incredibly dense with changes, can just
Hmm.
help create some sanity there.
Yeah. Dense with changes. I think we've
It's a
all been
nice,
there.
nice way, right?
Yeah, dense with changes. I like that. They're not going to be invited to the next review cycle. Um, so, you've already highlighted some areas where software can make this a lot easier, a lot more efficient. What are some of the other aspects that maybe we haven't touched on where somebody that's listening to this is involved, is saying, I can see how that's a benefit, I can see how that's a benefit. What other types of benefits within the software, Vodori or others, are there available to people that are involved in this process?
Yeah, I think first of all, software is just hugely helpful for the process. We have software designed for a lot of different areas of the business. This is one where we feel like software really does benefit how you approach the process, the efficiency, and especially the compliance piece. So, Vidori's platform is going to make it really easy for the company to do a couple of things. Upload the content for review and approval, link all your claims, substantiate all of the information included within that document so that when the reviewer does pull something up for review, they can not only see the content up for review, but then have easy links to go review any of the substantiated material, which is just helpful in creating connectivity. And also, that's one of the pain points we hear a lot, right? Where am I going to find this information? Just how can I, just create some frustration within the team. It's also just visibility of workload.
Hmm.
So within Vodora, you have a jobs board where you can literally see from, different purviews within the organization, what's all the content that's currently up for review. So this is helpful not only for the content submitter who needs to know where is my content right now? Who is it potentially stuck with? Who do I need to go talk to, right? Where is it in the review process? But it's also helpful for the reviewer to understand maybe they see a bunch of content that's in the preparing phase, so they know, okay, there's going to be some content coming for me this week. I need to make sure that I allocate some time for review and approval of this content. So it's a hugely helpful for just visibility, traceability of the work, understanding where things are in flight, which can also be a common challenge if you're just using email. You're like, where is this piece of content review? Who is it with? Who's provided feedback? Who's not? So really helpful for sort of the project managers within the organization. And then, some software is helpful for sort of the workflow aspects. And then there's going to be other software solutions like Vodori's that are more specifically purpose-built for life sciences. So then you have some of those added compliance benefits, right? You can manage claims, you can pre-approve claims and host them within the platform, so they're always accessible to the team. Provide your e-signature in compliance with 21 CFR Part 11, have an audit trail of the content so you can, should you be audited, all that information is really at your fingertips, ready for it. So there are always going to be, you know, there's like a workflow project management aspect and then the compliance aspect. And so certainly there are a lot of options out there, but especially for a life science company, those compliance features are really important and sort of what set this process apart from different types of content review and approval.
Yeah, love it. I was thinking about the 13.8 days.
Okay.
All right. I was thinking about how once I finished a cycle, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Not a rev cycle, but I've finished that whole process. I've done the
Yep.
13.8 days. Um, that there's the concept of a postmortem. There must be a better term nowadays, but I guess that shows my
That's the one
age.
I know.
Oh, okay. All right. They must, we need to come up with a better word for that, but regardless,
Yeah.
um, you know, are there ways in which I can conduct a personal postmortem to
Mm.
determine how effective I was in that process and where areas of improvement exist? Because there is no control without measurement. So,
Hmm.
can you comment on that?
Yeah. So the way that we think about this at Vidori is around, I'll bring up benchmarks again.
Hmm.
So looking at your content review process and saying, okay, team, this is how long it's taking for us to review and approve content. Now you can look at this from the aggregate level, like I shared on the 13.8 days of across the board, this is about what it's taking on average. You can look at specific content subtypes. So, okay, we're seeing videos are a really big problem for us. We've got to
Mm,
talk through this and figure out specific things to help with that. We also provide data and benchmarking data around reviewer roll times. So how long is it typically taking regulatory departments to review and provide feedback on a piece of content? And so you can look at the metrics in a whole variety of ways, but what is measured is improved. And so if you're really struggling with this process, we really advise that you do take a close look at the data and the metrics. It tells obviously a story from a speed perspective, but it can also illuminate where you might need to focus intention, effort, or conversation. Maybe you used to review and approve content in 2 weeks, and now it's taking 4. Okay, that's a great conversation to have. Why is this happening? Is there a change within the organization? Did we change something about the process? Is there someone new on the team? It can help localize where you're focusing your effort or where you need to drill down. But we always recommend you start with the data, start with the benchmarks. Certainly, Vodori's benchmarks report is a great place to start if you don't have those types of metrics within your system or organization. But the data really is integral in improving this process and optimizing it over time, because of all the things I said. And just, you have to understand in order to improve the process, you have to understand how you're measuring it today.
yeah, love it. All right, now let's look into the future.
Okay.
All right, AI,
Yeah.
right? Can you comment on AI in this process? Does it exist? Have you thought about it? Are there things coming up? Everybody's always inserting AI into everything, so why change it for this podcast?
Great point. It is coming up. We are getting
Mhm.
asked about AI in particular, as a lot of other software companies are. We're curious. We're
Mm,
very much exploring the different ways that AI can plug into the process, but we also want to treat it with the right amount of rigor and intentionality, and that this is a compliance space. And so we need to make sure that we're involving AI in an intentional way. And
mm,
so we're currently exploring. There's nothing I can tell you today on like this is
sure.
what's going to happen in terms of AI, but for example, you could imagine AI being used to pre-read the document for spelling mistakes,
Hmm. Right.
pre-scan the document to make sure that the brand colors are the right ones, the logo is the right logo. What are the things that can happen before it gets to the human
Mm,
beings to make sure that this is the best version of content available, because you don't have to worry about spelling mistakes. You're not going to get, sidetracked because of grammar issues. What are sort of the pre-checks almost that we
mm,
can put into place to
yeah.
make the content that much better when it gets to review? Because one of the qualms we hear a lot is the content's just not that good when it gets to me. I'm bothered by all the spelling mistakes. That's distracting
Mm,
to me. It's not like, and so can we improve content quality with the assistance of AI so that really when it gets to review, those reviewers can focus on their specific aspects of their role to make sure the content is compliant. Let's focus the humans on the areas where judgment is involved, and we
right.
really do need human brains. Are there other areas maybe before where AI could be involved, in some of those pre-check areas? So those are some of the things that we're exploring and talking about. No decisions made yet, obviously, but it is a question we're getting asked and certainly a part of the conversation as we, move forward.
Yeah. Well, th this has been really educational for me. I'm really excited for people that haven't heard of Fedori, that are like, oh, I didn't even know a system like this existed. Because now, I just wish that existed for MSA reviews. But that's my issue. So this has been awesome. Before we close, what would you like to leave the audience with?
Yeah, folks, please check Vodori out. You can learn more about our software solutions at Vodori.com. If you're interested in this benchmarks topic, we just released our 2024 benchmarks report. You can download it by going to Vodori.com/2024 benchmarks. A really great place to start if you're interested in process optimization and just process metrics generally. And then I'll plug the Amend and Progress podcast. You can subscribe to our podcast wherever you get your podcast today, Apple, YouTube, Spotify, all the places. So please come check us out. We're just always having conversations about the process and content management and compliance and all the fun things. So please come check us out. We would love to grow our community.
Yeah. And just to let everybody know, I was on that podcast, so it's coming out. It's a pretty good podcast, so check it out.
One of the best.
Thank you so much, Annalise. And for everybody listening, as always, if you find conversations like this valuable, please share it with a colleague or your professional network. If you haven't already, subscribe to get updates of new episodes at thefdagroup.com/podcast and follow the FDA Group on LinkedIn. If you'd like to connect about project or resource needs, head over to thefdagroup.com to get in touch, or feel free to connect with me personally on LinkedIn. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see y'all next time.